If you want my body and you think I'm sexy, come on, honey, impress me by being a regular listener to the Stick to Wrestling podcast. I want to thank Rod Stewart, my good friend, for writing that song about his favorite podcast, Stick to Wrestling. Give us 60 minutes and we will give you a wicked good podcast. Sean Goodwin, please welcome to the show and tell everyone about our fabulous Facebook group.
John's clearly running out of songs. Today's episode is a perfect example of the value of our Facebook group as a kind of a companion piece, and again, to what we do in the show. This episode, basically, the idea for this was taken from the Facebook page. One of the posts asked about doing a show just about one of the old magazines, the Apter Mags.
Yeah, and that's what we'll be doing, and I will never run out of songs, and we'll get rolling on that. Yeah, and one of the things that came up on the Facebook page was like, this is an example of like what it's like. Someone asked, okay, what was the worst promotion ever? And my answer was kind of like, okay, it has to be a promotion that lasted more than a year or two. So there goes California Championship Wrestling. And put it this way, if Al Tomko is on our Facebook group, I offended him today. But anyway, follow me on Twitter. Just put in the name John McAdam and go with the wrestling guy. I don't stick just to wrestling, but it's definitely on the menu there. And yeah, we are going to get rolling. We're going to talk about one of the Apter magazines, the February 1982 Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine. Little background here. I think this was the first PWI where Ric Flair was the NWA champion. Rick had the new car smell. The January 1982 Inside Wrestling and The Wrestler had him as the champion, and they came out a couple of weeks before Pro Wrestling Illustrated. Now, just to give you an idea where I was with these magazines, I mean, it's 1981. I am 16 years old. The magazine store in Nashua, New Hampshire, where I lived, got the magazines on Tuesday, but a bookstore in Merrimack, New Hampshire, got the magazines the Thursday before. Well, guess who made the trip to Merrimack, New Hampshire at once a week, usually, always, if I knew that Inside Wrestling, The Wrestler, or Pro Wrestling Illustrated was coming out. So I'm taking at least 45 minutes out of my day just to get these things 5 days early. If I couldn't go on Thursday, I was going on Friday. If I couldn't go on Friday, I was going definitely on Saturday. And yes, I was making that trip to get these magazines 3 days early. That's who I was at this point in my life. And let me just give you an example. Here's an article. It was called On Assignment, and it was written by Steve Farhood, who I think really existed, unlike some of the other Apter Mag personalities like Matt Brock, who just didn't exist, or Liz Hunter, who didn't exist. He meets Dusty in Chicago. By the way, these columns were a lot less formal. It's so bad. These columns are so much a little bit less formal than the feature articles that they have.
A little less formal. Dusty was having his blueberry pancakes and syrup, baby.
The story was that Steve Farhood met Dusty Rhodes in Chicago, and Dusty was in Chicago because he was having a meeting with his tax accountant. I guess this means that there were no good tax accountants in the whole state of Florida or the whole state of Georgia. But wait, this guy can only help Dusty, presumably, with his federal income tax returns. So already big hole in the story. And as a 16-year-old, I did pick up on this. Now, here we go where it gets absolutely crazy.
As a 6-year-old, I picked up on it.
This is Steve's voice. I ordered a bacon cheeseburger. And by the way, putting bacon on burgers was like new and exotic at this point in time.
It was like the Phantom Gourmet for the first 7 paragraphs.
I ordered a bacon cheeseburger and rice pudding. Dusty ordered 2 helpings of blueberry pancakes without syrup and a bowl of cottage cheese. Right then, I knew he was in a bad emotional state. He always, it's italicized, he always orders syrup with his pancakes. And I'll tell you, even now, I'm a little bit embarrassed that these magazines were such a huge part of my life. I mean, granted, I got them for the news, but I also read them cover to cover as soon as I got home with them.
These in my memory were a lot better. I read this. And John will attest to this. I read this cover to cover mainly because I wanted to remember the ads. But yeah, this doesn't age well at all. First of all, you can get to New York from Florida closer than Chicago. So I think you can find a decent accountant there. So they found him in Chicago for some reason. We have this whole pancake. The best part is that he has cottage cheese too. I guess he's on a diet. So
I think that's got to be an inside joke on Dusty.
This is like the equivalent of having some kind of massive dessert and having Splenda on top of it. I mean, what are you trying to prove? I mean, yeah. So basically, a half a page of this story was just about what they were eating.
A lot less formal than. Notice I'm calling the main articles formal.
I still haven't gotten to the point yet, and we're pretty much to the break. We haven't gotten to the point yet, except that he just lost the belt. And to back up what you were saying earlier, the cover story in this magazine is about Rick's first title defense against Harley Race. I'm guessing Bill went because they had some great art, and they both must have known Bill was there because they both cut a gusher in the match. It was in Kansas City.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what. I'll let you pick the next article to talk about, and I'll tell you whether or not Bill was there. I can find out.
Okay, let's see. So let's see what else we had in the cover. So in the cover we have Rick bleeding, and okay, this is an easy one. Another one is
by Bill Apter. There it is.
Yeah, another one is Morocco getting robbed by Bob Backlund. There was a big expose in the magazine proving that Don Morocco should be the world champion. And
conclusive evidence how Bob Backlund's title is saved by the referees.
Pictures.
Now they baby-faced Bob Backlund to death in these things, so this is kind of a curveball here.
So, and I mean, knowing the Don Morocco mark from this time that I agree completely.
Well, yeah, and getting a little bit off the topic as far as the magazine itself. I mean, all of Bob's title defenses in Madison Square Garden that I have on film, Philly that I have on film, in Boston that I went to, hardly any of them had a clean finish. There was always, something in there where the heel could say, "Oh, I was robbed."
Okay, the other story is the other stuff on the front page is a horrific story about Ken Patera. Well, again, this is almost surreal. It was like there was a couple of spots in this issue where there was like peyote was involved somewhere, and the Ken Patera
very well could have been.
The Ken Patera story was one of them. But I'll get to that in a second. And then we have the ballot for the wrestlers and the awards for 1981, the year-end awards.
Right. In other words, you're wasting a stamp because they picked them.
When does it come out? This is February. We're having the awards for last year.
Okay, I specifically remember this magazine coming out in like early to mid-December 1981. It was like Christmas season.
Okay, so which story you want to talk about next?
Let me see. Let's go with I have one. Oh, I mean, let's go with the Morocco story, because what had gone on here is Morocco and Backlund had just the month before they had gone to that 1 hour draw, which is not available on film as far as I know. They announced a rematch that was, a 2 hour time limit, I believe, and Backlund beat Morocco when Morocco had his foot on the ropes, and they're showing all kinds of pictures of superstar Billy Graham famously having his foot on the rope when Backlund won the title. They've got another one of Backlund against Angelo Mosca from earlier that year. So, yeah, like I said, they were always maybe not making Backlund look good, but definitely not letting the heels look bad.
What would be the reasoning behind the story? Is there anything political, or is just, we have all this cool footage of, there's the picture of Morocco looking at the referee with his leg over the rope, and, as you said, there's the shot of Graham. I mean, did someone make a phone call or something, or?
No. Here's what happened. I mean, they would go to the arenas and take pictures, and then they would go back to the office and make stories around the pictures. And they came up with some crazy stories. I mean, I can only imagine what it was like being in that office, maybe at night, and, coming up with this stuff. And you mentioned peyote. I wouldn't rule it out.
Did anyone ever push back?
As far as I know, no. I mean, I think everyone kind of knew that, they're called the Apter Magazines, even though they were owned by, I just had his
Stanley Weston.
Thank you. I just had his name in my head. But Apter ran the show, and everyone just kind of rolled with him.
And he got his start as a photographer, of course.
Yes. And then he, slowly but surely made his way up, up the ladder. And by, I would say, the early 70s, he was more or less running the show at The Wrestler and Inside Wrestling.
So that does kind of amaze me, though. I mean, these guys, maybe they had a thicker skin back then, but you think someone would be like, oh, come on. Or they just kind of assumed it's never,
I think you mean like if they wrote a negative article, a somewhat negative article about Babyface?
Yeah, what I was basically trying to look for right there was a negative, like a somewhat of a negative story. Like here's one, and they kind of had to do this, but it was about Mr. Wrestling 2, and this was in regards to an actual angle that happened where I guess they were playing around with turning him heel, and it was so bad, it really had no chance, even if it was a good idea. Where Wrestling 2 was whining that he didn't win the most popular wrestler for the year before. So there's a story in here where he kind of looks stupid, where he writes this explaining why I overreacted about the award. Now, they almost had to do this just to kind of explain away because they quickly aborted it and it looked strange. So this is a good way to explain it. But say it was something like that where, say Backlund here doesn't look great. Does Bob look at this and be like, oh, come on?
I'm sure someone somewhere, some babyface, probably said something at some point. But here's the thing, and we'll get back to the 2 thing in the mix. I've got information on that. I think the wrestlers essentially knew that, look, these magazines, at the end of the day, they're good for business. Bob Backlund being on the cover of these magazines, as he frequently was, it was good for his career. I think the guys just more or less rolled with it. But back to the Mr. Wrestling 2 thing. Here's something the Apter Mags would do. They would get word that a wrestler was turning heel, and they would start writing articles, that made the wrestler seem kind of heelish. Well, there were at least 2 times where this blew up in their face. Late 89, early 80, they started writing, they started making Ricky Steamboat sound really grouchy, and he had grown out a mustache, and I haven't heard that Mid-Atlantic had planned on turning him, but I definitely believe the Apter Mags thought he was turning because he seemed to have soured a little bit. Part 2 of this is Mr. Wrestling 2. They absolutely were planting the seeds long in advance that Mr. Wrestling 2 was turning heel, and they were planning on doing it. I do know that. And they did not pull the plug. They went in a different direction, which, by the way, I think is a really good idea. Mr. Wrestling 2 was not a guy you turned heel in Georgia at this point, and they had to run back on it and, basically write this ridiculous article explaining what was going on and why he didn't turn, etc. And and this tells you something else, too, about the direction the wrestling business in general is going. More and more people are getting WTBS, and more people were having access to what was going on with the Mr. Wrestling 2 angle. So this is their kind of way of just saying, okay, here's what happened.
How are these magazines most influential? What part? Because I remember when I used to get them, the 3 parts I was most excited about was the pull-out section, the feature on somebody. In this case, it's Gurria and Martel, which I would be annoyed about that. But it would be some feature, and then we'd have little questions about them, like your greatest match and all this. I love that. The top 10 rankings, of course. Mm-hmm. And then the ads. What parts of the magazine do you think were, because you often hear someone's coming to a territory, well, we knew him because of the magazines.
Oh, yeah.
What parts of the magazines, what features that I'm looking at were the most influential overall to wrestling itself?
I would say the number one thing, and here's the thing, I would go into that bookstore with every intention of buying these magazines, but I would sit there for, 10 minutes and get through the important part. The number one important part was the ratings, because if there was an AWA or an NWA title change, there it is right there. The second part would be
2 years later.
It was literally, you know what? By this point, they were getting better because Flair had won the title a little bit less than 2 months after, and the magazines came out with it like 6 or 7 weeks after he won it. So it used to be like 3 months, and they were getting better at that.
Did they call Bill ahead of time and go, you may want to be there for such and such event?
Oh, yeah. Totally.
So why didn't Bill have pictures of the championship, the title change?
Like, why didn't he know in advance, or?
Because he was clearly in the area. He was in Kansas City the next night.
Yeah, that's a good. Actually, they say it's Des Moines, Iowa.
Oh, it was okay. I'm sorry, Des Moines, Iowa. It's in that area. But I mean, that was the next night where he went and fought Harley. But you are right. It was Des Moines.
They, you know what? This is speculative on my part, but yeah, they must have known. Apter had to have known, because I know he was at ringside for the match in Kansas City. I remember him, during the match snapping pictures. So he probably just hung around, went to Des Moines.
Could they have used like those pictures in another one of Bill's magazines, and they didn't want to use them twice?
It's possible. But here's the thing, Bill Apter. I mean, we talked about. He kind of put out this magazine has a somewhat negative article about Bob Backlund, but Bill Apter and the wrestling business, they scratched each other's back. Like the Spoiler wrestled in Madison Square Garden without his mask, because back then you weren't allowed to wear a mask at Madison Square Garden. Apter did not publish those pictures. Bob Backlund lost the WWF title in Japan to Antonio Inoki in '79. Apter did not even mention it. So it worked both ways. The wrestling business helped him, and he definitely protected the wrestling business.
Oh, there were multiple title changes he never talked about. I mean, the Jack Veneno one, the Carlos Colon one that was never mentioned, the one with Harley Race in New Zealand was never mentioned, the Jack Briscoe ones in Japan. Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely.
Ones were. The Baba ones were, but the other ones, you're right, he didn't mention them.
This stuff was so whitewashed. Was there ever a point where he got into trouble with the promoters?
Yes, I remember they collectively got mad at him because he printed an article about Jerry Lawler beating Andre the Giant by countout. And I don't even know if that was the actual result of that match, but I know Vince Sr. got steamed at Apter for that. But here's the thing, out of like 20 years, that's the only example I can come up with until '83 when, the WWF wouldn't let him shoot at ringside anymore. He totally turned on the WWF after that.
Well, but there was a specific reason for that. I mean, if you can't, I wouldn't even say he turned on him. If you can't shoot, the whole magazine was based on the pictures. Exactly. As you just said, you would do the articles by, look at this picture. We have a picture of Don Morocco with his foot in the rope. You know what? We'll go there. And whatever, make up the article or whatever like that. But it was all based on the picture first, article came afterwards. If you can't take pictures at MSG, and this wasn't a grudge thing with Vince either. He just wanted his own mag. He wanted his own in-house magazine. Did he ever talk to Bill about bringing Bill in?
That is a good question, and I can't help but think that Apter must have been approached. Why wouldn't Vince McMahon want to hire Bill Apter?
That would be obvious. I mean, how many times has he shot? I mean, how many years has he been shooting MSG up to that point? 17,
I
18?
I would say since like 70 or 71, he was shooting MSG. So it would be a two-part process. Number one, he'd get a really good photographer who was smart to the wrestling business and didn't mess with it. And number two, he just pulled the plug on Weston.
Right. And it's not like you have to sit there and throw a ton of, the way he's throwing around money back then. I mean, I can't imagine taking care of Bill Apter would be difficult.
Okay, another thing that I generally enjoyed about the Apter magazine, back in 1970, I think it was late 70, it was early 77, they had, guys writing their columns, and Dan Shocket, out of nowhere, turns heel. He writes a column saying that, he's finally seen the light, and the rule breakers are where it's at in pro wrestling. And from that day forward, he wrote articles that, were in favor of the bad guys. And some of these articles were really good. Some of them did not age well. And Dan
this was one of the ones that didn't age well.
He did a mailbag for Pro Wrestling Illustrated, and this I don't remember this being the best one, but a little bit of sad irony going on here. He gets a letter from Robert Garipa in Brooklyn, New York, and by the way, I'm almost positive these letters were a shoot. Like, he really got them and he really responded. Dear Dopey Dan, while you still have the chance, join the scientific wrestlers and forget the rule-breaking bums. Now I'm going against what I just said. That this seems very worked. Michael Hayes did, Victor Rivera did, and so did Bad Leroy Brown. Dusty Rhodes held the NWA Championship while Slime Harley Race rots away. Bob Backlund continues to clean up the scum of the WWF, and to call Nick Bockwinkel a champ is like calling you a good writer. Face it, Shocket, everyone's turning good, and before you know it, so will you. The response: Dear Ridiculous Robert, let's hope we both live long enough to see me become a supporter of scientific wrestlers. Sadly enough, Dan Shocket died of cancer like 3 years later. So I guess we didn't live long enough.
What are you doing to me here? I have a little thing to put in on Shocket, and you throw that in there. Now I'm going to look like a jerk for saying it.
What was you going to say that was going to make you look like a jerk?
No. I'm just kidding. Isn't it amazing that the letters and the responses have the exact same writing style? And one other thing, you know what the tip-off was that these were worked? Please tell me one wrestling fan who ever wrote or said out loud the phrase scientific wrestling, unless it was like mocking.
You know what? I don't know if anyone. I'm beginning to wonder, but I'm beginning. I think if you read the Apter magazines, I use the term good guy and bad guy. I never said scientific wrestler or rule breaker, but those are the terms those magazines used. So if you read the magazines, I could see a person using those terms, even though I could also see them not using those terms.
Oh, this really was a good idea too, and it really does. I mean, maybe you're right. This was a particularly bad one. I guess they were jokes about Ted DiBiase, which I didn't even understand. It was pull one up quick, but they were these just like they're supposed. I guess they were supposed to be jokes. I wasn't sure they were supposed to be until he told me. Why did Ted DiBiase get fired as an elevator operator? He got lost on the job.
And where's that guy from?
I was going to leave that out. Thank you very much.
Come on, where's Jack Donahue from?
He's from Taunton, Mass.
There you go, Taunton, Mass.
I didn't say we're proud of all of them. And the second one is, why does Ted DiBiase only smell good on his right side? He doesn't know where to buy left guard.
Well, right guard was a popular deodorant back then.
I know. It doesn't matter. It's still not a joke. It's dumb. But anyway, yeah, this ages. Like, if the guy just went, you know what? Why am I sitting there watching so and so get turned on for the 17th time? You know, do it like Piper. You know, when Piper was a heel announcer, it wasn't overt. It was very subtle. You know, it would just be little things he would bring up, like, yeah, of course you're gonna cheat there. Why wouldn't you? No one's looking.
Bob Roop was the same way.
It was very logical. That's what they should have done here. But this guy basically just decides to play the heel guy.
Yeah, but I mean, it's the Apter magazines. Everything was over the top, and let's be honest, it was either written for children or written for people who have the minds of children. I mean, you know,
and us,
and us. Yeah, I mean, I said this earlier. I was enjoying these things far too longer than I should have.
And then, as far as as we discussed the made-up portion, we'll get to the press conference with Bruno. There are harder hitting interviews in Pravda. The first part of the interview is the staff begging Bruno not to retire, with Bruno going, "Boys, you know I've got to be on my way." You know, like this John Wayne bit. I mean, this is so after he says he can't possibly come back, he relives the title win from Rogers, and he's saying, you know, I think the question was the win over Rogers your greatest win? I'm telling you, that's some insight. I'm trying to remember, were these all the interviews?
No, they had a regular feature called the Hotseat in Inside Wrestling, and that is when. That I figured out how I was 11 or 12 years old, and Baron von Raschke had just come to the WWF, so he was on the hot seat. Now, they made a big deal about these guys flying into New York and being on their hot seat segment. Well, I read through this, and I'm like, okay, this conversation would take 2 or 3 minutes, and this guy flew all the way to New York to have it. Even if Von Raschke was in the WWF, and he was in New York, okay, but like other guests, they made a big deal out of flying into New York just for that. And so so I knew right away that like the interviews were fake.
Well, that and the time that Eddie Gilbert was mad about his cold hot dog, so he threw a fireball at it.
I don't remember that one.
I figured that didn't happen in JFK or LaGuardia Airport without gathering the attention of the Fed. So another guy here who's a real guy is Stu Sachs.
Stu Sachs is a real guy.
Here he writes in his Dressing Room Confidential that the NWA recently met to discuss the lax enforcement of the rules.
This was a good one.
So we have Dressing Room Confidential from the very real Stu Sachs, and they were the NWA officials recently met to discuss the lax enforcement of the rules. The following rules were discussed. The 10 count outside the ring, break it for a DQ at 5. The stranglehold is, quote, not legal, because I guess it was before. Jumping off the top rope is a violation. So is eye gouging. Contact on the arena floor is a double DQ. Chops, karate strikes are illegal. Punch with closed fist is illegal. Pushing, shoving, striking on the referee draws an automatic DQ, and continued verbal abuse to the referee leads to a DQ. Did anybody outside of early 90s WCW Bill Watts enforce these?
Just about no. Unless you needed like a weird finish, no.
And how often did Bill run this article out?
This is the only time I can remember this specific article, although I could just be forgetting something.
There was always something with their meeting about the rules of this area or the lax enforcement here. And then there was a letter from the referee of some referee saying that, it's not our fault. You got to blame him. Blame the wrestlers for it. And it seems like they had it like in 1983 with Slaughter and Dawn against Ricky and Jay, where they were talking about the violence in the sport. And
that was a common theme.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It was in some various versions of this where they bring up the rules that they're not, enforcing, and they proceed to not enforce them again. So I guess that wasn't very influential. Who else was real here? Okay, we have Bill.
I think the only made-up characters were Liz Hunter and Matt Brock. I could be mistaken, at least during this era. I think those are the only two. Speaking of Matt Brock, let's talk about some informal writing. I really wonder who wrote for Matt Brock. I bet it was Apter, but I'm not sure. I'll tell you, my friends, this holiday season is beginning to get to me. I no sooner get through Thanksgiving with my bank account just about intact, and then in quotes, Farhood said he had some good tips for the turkey gate contest. I swear he's making kickback money somewhere. When Christmas is starting to breathe down my neck, before you know it, New Year's Day will be here and I'll lose another bundle on the bowl games. Okay, nice to know that Matt can be so informal with us, but he talks about Baron von Raschke turning babyface in the AWA. As far as I know, this is the first time ever von Raschke had been a babyface. And he says, now I know a lot of people think that the Baron is a great friend because he's sticking up for his friend because he's avenging a wrong perpetrated by Blackwell and Studd. And this is the injured Mad Dog Vachon. Well, all Matt is telling you right now, 2 wrongs don't make a right. I paid to read this stuff, like real money. And I didn't have a lot of it back in 1981.
Know who I think wrote it? I think it was Dr. Peter Labaro, PhD in PC, who also happened to write the article Ken Patera, Man on the Run, from himself.
Oh, Man on the Run. ... From himself.
There is again a distinct similarity between the two. But the good doctor is, and he's a big wrestling fan. This is from the bottom of his heart, and he's such a professional. He's never met the man before in his entire life and knows nobody around him. But he is determined his self-loathing diagnosis through the fact that he leaves territories abruptly.
Well, and to think about it, he hadn't even started doing that yet. Ken was being a big boy.
I have a few guys to add to the list. Now, okay, on something like that, where does this come from? Like, where do they come up with it? There's no picture that shows, like, Ken, running away from somebody. Where do they come up with this bizarre story? Or did somebody call in complaining that Ken is ducking places early?
No, they would just know. Okay, Ken, he's wrestling where was he in this part of 81? Okay, 1980, Patera had a wild run. He was the Intercontinental Champion and the Missouri Champion at the same time. He was wrestling in Japan. He made appearances in the AWA. So they probably put all this together and just made this. St. Louis, let's not forget that. Houston. So they put all this together and say, hey, let's make this wacky article about a noted psychologist examining Patera's recent actions and offers his analysis.
Not bad.
Not just a psychologist, a noted psychologist.
Does anybody lobby them? I know, didn't Jerry kind of lobby them a little bit? Lawler?
Lobby them for what, more pictures and articles?
Just getting, publicity and stuff like that. Because I mean, certain territories got more love than others. They were never in, say, Southeastern because the Fullers didn't want them.
That is what Bo James said on this very show.
Yeah, so basically also that was the case with, I guess Portland was just too far. There was a few territories who just didn't want those guys coming in, but other territories like Georgia got a lot of coverage.
Yeah, and a lot of it, I mean, you're not only the promoter is not only getting publicity, the wrestler is getting publicity. And if you get, to this day, I say that PWI almost made Lex Luger in 1986. The guy, he's wrestling for the Florida promotion, which is as minor league as could be, but he's on the cover of a lot of their magazines because he was good looking and photogenic. And I believe that created a little bit of a mania for both the WWF and the NWA to want that guy. I say that guy like I don't like him or something. I like him just fine. It's just that, he got made in a very interesting way.
When it comes to their influence, I couldn't help but notice on page 37, on a little snippet of an article, I was blown away by this, that Mil Mascaras has been stifled.
Stifled? Like Edith?
Bill's got to be kidding. He had him on. How many times did Mil Mascaras end up on the cover of some Bill Apter magazine?
Oh my God! I mean, Apter admits it. Mil Mascaras was Bill Apter's favorite wrestler, and Mil got a lot more magazine covers as a result. Bruno and Mascaras were always on the cover, and according to Apter himself, anytime he put Bruno on the cover, the magazine sold way more than it otherwise would have. So no wonder these guys are crying about Bruno retiring.
And I'm thinking they're thinking like maybe this is like an internal complaint about Mil not being on the cover of this magazine, because he actually couldn't get on one. So inside he puts his little passive-aggressive protest in there about getting Mil back there where he belongs.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I wonder, I guess they must have sold enough magazines when Mascaras was on the cover. I mean, I don't think Bill would put, his personal preferences that much over, what was good for the business. I mean, let's face it, too. Mascaras was a very colorful guy. He had the mask, he had the body. So I can kind of see them having him on. I mean, certainly they should have had him on a little bit less, but I could see them having him on.
In two-dimensional form, he was magnificent.
Well put, sir. All right, let me read a little snippet from Steve Farhood.
I am stomping at the bit to get to the ad, so go ahead.
Okay, we will get to the ads. Believe me, I can put a cherry on that sundae. Masked Superstar has been temporarily suspended from professional wrestling in the United States. How can you do that? The term of his suspension is yet to be decided. The ban stems from an incident between Masked Superstar and NWA representative George Scott. During a television interview, Superstar threatened the official. Scott replied that any attack on a wrestling representative will ensure Masked Superstar will be banned from wrestling in U.S. arenas. Superstar proceeded to rough up the official, who subsequently made good on his promise. Masked Superstar is currently wrestling in Japan. From there, he intends to fight his suspension. This is a little bit meaningful to me, because this is, I think, the first real angle I saw on Georgia television.
I was going to say, this happened.
Yeah, and I bet at least someone from the PWI family was getting cable by this point, or WTBS on cable, even though New York City didn't get cable until like 88, 89. Because, George is getting a lot more publicity and they're getting a lot more photos. But the all-time strange tag team of Ray Stevens and Tor Kamada, along with the Masked Superstar and their manager Great Mephisto, they did the angle where Tommy Rich was wrestling Masked Superstar in the cage, and all the heels jumped in the cage and beat up Tommy Rich, and George Scott came out to yell at Masked Superstar, and George Scott was so belligerent. I couldn't stand that guy. How that guy was a babyface was beyond me.
Scott.
It was Sandy Scott. Okay.
Yep.
George Scott, Sandy Scott, same guy. And yeah, Superstar like grabbed him and roughed him up on TV, and the guy did a good job selling it. He looked like he was going to shit himself. And
that's all he did. That was his job at that time. It seemingly he would sit there and like move money around, promote some towns, and on air he would be the enforcement of the NWA and get beaten up occasionally. Bob Geigel took his role.
Yeah, really. Like I said, I saw the guy, I mean, a couple of years ago when WWE Network put out all those Mid-Atlantic episodes that I hadn't seen before, and the guy was just so overbearing. He just wanted one of the heels to slap him in the mouth.
No, it happened. Now about this section here, this was a section called the Wrestling Inquirer. It looks like it was an insert. Was this a magazine he was trying to get up and running, or?
No, I think it was just part of this magazine itself. Basically, a small news section, that give you little snippets of what was going on. For example, Sergeant Slaughter won the United States title. Adonis and Ventura are heading to the WWF. Vern Gagne apparently did some commentary on AWA TV. I don't know if that's true or not.
Well, no, allegedly, what I'm thinking is these all happened. Slaughter did win the U.S. belt. They did split up at this. Adonis and Ventura did split up at this time. They did have the angle where Jaggers was refusing to defend the belt. What I'm thinking is that because if you look at it, it says November 1981, but it looks like an insert. This is Bill's chance to throw in stories that actually happened. So Maybe. It gives like an air of legitimacy to the magazine.
Yeah, but then we get the curveball. After winning the Southern Heavyweight Championship, Bobby Jaggers has steadfastly refused to face any challengers, despite the fact that 138 wrestlers have formally challenged him. Wah, wah. Jaggers saw fit to accept only one challenge from a rookie. The match never occurred because the young man was in the hospital at the time, recovering from pneumonia. Jaggers won his only title defense by default.
It sounds ridiculous written down, but if you look at that as potentially a Jerry Briscoe promo on Florida TV, then that sounds like something he could have said. Like I could see Jerry going off on Jagger saying there was 138 guys who did this, and the only one he took was in the hospital, a rookie. It sounds like a promo that Jerry Briscoe would have given.
You know what? I don't remember. I was getting Florida TV. I just stopped getting Florida TV at this time. I don't remember Jaggers doing anything with Jerry Briscoe. But remember, 138. Those are only the formal challengers. Don't forget the informal ones.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying a guy did it in a promo and gave some outrageous, exaggerated number. Just as a gag, saying, just trying to make him look even worse. Again, it goes back to all this stuff like when you just said it, where it blew you away that you saw the angle that just happened with the Masked Superstar. Well, that was the point. They were hoping that you were a Florida fan going, oh, I just saw that. Okay. And then it gives kind of an air of believability to the rest of it until you get to the ads.
Until you get to the ads, let's talk about the advertisements in this magazine. Sean, I give you the floor.
There are more upfront people in Hustler than there are in the advertisement section of these fine wrestling magazines. So, let me ask you: have you ever bought any of these?
I cannot remember buying anything from an ad in a pro wrestling magazine. I do not believe so.
Let me just give you a rundown here of what you're looking at. Now, the ads usually start off at the back third, but when they start, and they just come flying at you all over the place.
And they've got some crazy stuff here.
And if you were of a certain age, I'm sure you've seen all of these because that we all saw the ads. They were great. So one is you have a Dr. A.S. can make you several inches taller. I'm guessing actually spelling out his full name was too expensive. So he just went with Dr. A.S. But supposedly you can buy his 3 very important volumes for $12 and grow several inches taller soon. I'm gathering Bill does not go off of federal guidelines for like SEC guidelines for selling your product.
They might have been different back then. Or it might have been a product that did not require any kind of approval from the FDA or whatever.
Or you can learn karate at home from the New Oriental Karate School in Avon, New Jersey. You can build muscles at home from muscle builders in Louisville, Kentucky.
Okay, hang on. The be taller thing. If you want to know the facts about height increase, send 35 cents for details to Tall Up Department at a P.O. box in Louisville. Hope Jim Cornette wasn't involved with this. So basically, it's an advertisement for you to be sent a pamphlet.
Oh,
So
no. That's a next ad. You're on the.
I'm sorry.
Take a look at page 33 is mine. That's the second Be Taller ad. It's like competing Be Taller ads.
Be several inches taller.
Right. But
man,
that costs $12.
But he's still just selling you. He's still just selling you like a newsletter. He's not selling you any like medicine or anything like that.
No, but the guy above on page 33 is sending you 3 important volumes, which sounds like an awful lot of work to gain a couple of inches. I don't even want to read one volume. I don't even want to read a pamphlet. Never mind 3 important volumes. And then it gets a little disturbing. You can get blank form birth and divorce certificates, $2 for 2 documents. That's comforting.
Oh, high school and college diplomas. This is awesome.
Yep. And nothing shady about that. And then you can get stronger arms. The rest of you are on your own. But you can get stronger arms. This will run you $5. Mike Marvel Scientific Isometrics. You remember Mike Marvel, right?
I remember the isometrics deal. I don't remember him by name.
I just know him because it was a picture of him all the time. He just kind of sat there almost like a wrestling promo with his arms crossing his chest and kind of looking out at you. Mike Marvel. I didn't even know it was a real guy. Could have just been a picture of some guy.
Okay, I know who he is, yeah.
Now,
how
if that
about the photo ID? Like $6 and you get a photo ID. Have you ever had a fake ID, Sean?
I'm going through the legal remedy. Okay, I think I'm okay on this. No, actually, I haven't.
Really?
No.
I was like the king of fake IDs. I almost got in trouble one day, like coming home from Montreal, and they pulled me over at the border and they went through my wallet, and I've got like 3 fake IDs. And it's a long story, but anyway, we order fake IDs.
You can get one, yeah. You can get one from Cardinal Publishing. For $6.
No, I went to another one. Me and 2 of my friends got 3 for $20, and when it showed up, it had this big metallic thing over it. It said not issued by any government agency. And I'm like, crap, we just blew $20. We should have thrown it in the street. Well, my friend's sister comes over and she looks at it and she takes a coin. It came off just like a scratch ticket. It was the greatest thing in the world.
I knew a girl in college who spelled her name wrong. On her own fake ID. So that,
yeah,
good job there. There's some BU quality right there. You can. So I mean, now if the stronger arm thing didn't work, I love this how you have like the competing ads right underneath each other. So if the stronger arms ad doesn't work, for 2 cents less or $8.98 for 2, you can get the hammer fist. The best part about this, so basically it's what you think it is, which is putting this weight on your fist. The best part about it is that they are nice enough to tell you that this is for lifting and strength, not for hitting other people with.
There you go. That's important.
I'm almost wondering if Bill kind of threw that in there just as a, just put that in there just in case, just for legal ramifications.
All right.
You can learn to draw in 1 minute, no talent necessary.
Now, I'm scrolling down a little bit. I don't know how many of you guys have been to wrestling arenas in the 80s, like the Boston Garden or wherever. They have solid bronze professional wallet badges. I think about the idea of some of these dirtbags and went to the Boston Garden, like buying these fake badges, and what came out next. Holy crap.
And then when we move on to page 36, we get into pretty much straight out fraudulent. So I found out that I can make my fortune stuffing envelopes. I get 80 cents per 1,000 I stuff. Now, if I go down here, it says that I can, let's see. Right here.
Page you on?
I'm on 36. I can make $1,500 weekly stuffing envelopes.
That's a lot of money in 1981.
If I take the above ad as math, where I'm making 80 cents per 1,000, it would take me stuffing 1.8 million envelopes to make this 1,500 a week. So I'm guessing there's a pay discrepancy. Maybe it's a fancy type of you need a special skill for the 1,500 envelope stuffer group.
Hey, you don't get to make $150,000 of 1981 money sitting on your ass.
And here's another one
Oh,
where
wait, you would be stuffing envelopes. Never mind.
Here's another one where you can make $2,728. A very specific number, probably, is added. Just send $3 to. Okay, first of all, if someone tells you you can make a lot of money, then send us money. Don't do that. Send $3 to Williams Enterprises in Rosedale, Mississippi, and we'll tell you how. They don't bring up how. They just give you the money amount and the address.
You ye of little faith, sir.
Oh, this is like a little bit of heaven. And then we have this. This is the entire ad. Big money, fast technique, $5. Mailed to Gainesville, Georgia.
All right. Now let me tell a quick story about these ads.
Last one. Exciting,
okay.
romantic, Oriental Latin girls. Free photos.
Oriental Latin?
Exciting and romantic.
I hope.
Free photos. I'm not sure what you're supposed to do after that. They kind of leave it at that.
Nothing suspicious at all about that.
So what was your story?
Lanny Poffo, I've got a couple. Lanny Poffo used to did an interview where he said that he ran a company that purchased ads in an Apter magazine. It was like a self-defense thing. Like, no one will ever do you harm again. And in the pamphlet, so, it was like $10 for this pamphlet that will make you indestructible. And in the pamphlet, it would say things like, if someone tries to attack you, climb up a tree and get away from them. Like, he would make a total farce out of it, and he would keep the person's money. Like, if that's not a wrestling thing, I don't know what is. Secondly, I remember the Ring magazine, one of the Kaiser magazines, I think it was Wrestling Review, had an article about basically talking about the Ring, Wrestling Review, I'm pretty sure it was written by Nat Loubet. And he was like, we take pride in our magazines not running ads that would make anybody embarrassed to own this magazine. You can have this magazine in your living room. Your children can look through it. I'm like, gee, I wonder who he's taking shots at.
Now, please. Go ahead. I was going to say, please keep it in mind as I give you this ad for world's largest matrimonial catalog.
All right, so keep all of that in perspective. This is after all the ads we just talked about were after they did a major cleanup of their ads. You should have seen some of the ads they had in the 70s. Let's start at the top. When I lived in North Attleboro, I talked about, as a kid, we grew up near a place that had a flea market every Sunday, and sometimes I'd go to the flea market, and sometimes people would have magazines out. Well, one day, this guy had a magazine. It was The Wrestler from, I think it was December 1975. So at the time, this magazine was about 2 or 3 years old. And I'm like, oh, cool. Can't wait to see this. Bring it home. And one of the ads had a girl wearing nothing but a pair of panties. She was topless. And there was this little black line going through her breast so that you couldn't see her nipples. But she was essentially topless. And it was for a love doll. And I was like, I'm not going to tell you I was the smartest kid in the world, but I knew stick that magazine into a pile of, wrestling, football, baseball, whatever magazines, and don't ever leave that one laying around because that'll be the last wrestling magazine you buy if your parents see this one.
That's the special under the mattress stack.
The mattress be the easiest place to find something. This would be just, it's a general stack that no one's going to look through. And no one ever did, so that worked.
But these are wholesome, wonderful kind of family entertainment. At the same address as the matrimonial catalog, we have Cancer Breakthrough.
Hey, where else to advertise for that but a wrestling magazine?
Just send a self-addressed stamp envelope to Dr. Box 14552, of course, Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
Does it just say doctor?
Yes, it does.
Oh, my God.
Again, you couldn't afford the letters for the full name, so just say doctor.
Okay. In the old magazines, they had advertisements for brass knuckles, but it was a belt buckle. But these were brass knuckles. They had
I remember
knives.
Those.
Yeah, they had all kinds of just crazy contraband stuff. And the ads we're seeing now is like the cleaned up version. So I just wanted to throw that in.
Oh, how about this? On page, page 36 here, you could buy solid bronze professional wallet badges. For $4.95, you can have a deputy sheriff 6-point star.
Yeah, that's the one I was talking about. Like, you don't want these wrestling dudes saying, "Hey, man, pull over. I need to have a word with you." Like, you know what's going to happen next. These people should not have badges.
You can have a special agent badge. I don't know a special agent of what, but you would be a special agent.
In general, just a special agent. It's a thing of beauty. But hey, anyway, I hope everyone enjoyed this episode of Stick to Wrestling. Sean, thank you for everything you do for the show. Also, I just want to throw this out again. If you want to be part of our Facebook group, just go to Facebook, search Stick to Wrestling, and it comes right up. I want to thank everyone for listening. I want to thank Lou for producing the show and doing everything he does. This show has been a production of the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network. We'll see you guys next week.